What's up, guys? It is time for a little MLB Deeper Dive where we will talk through everything you need to know on today's 13-game slate. We're going to start with the top pitching, talk about some low-owned guys, then we'll talk all the top stacks and try to give you guys a good read on everything you could do on today's slate. But I'm Kris Spags, joined once again by my man in the middle of Mondays for me here on the West Coast, and he's doing it out there wearing all black. So he is ready to rock out on you or maybe do some goth crying. I don't know if that's infringing on our pal Eric's bits, but he's Terry McBride. How you doing, Terry?
Yeah, the rest of the outfits in the other room, we're going to rob some houses later on after the sun sets. But right now we're talking baseball. So what's going on, man? How you doing?
I'm good. I'm excited to talk about this slate. I feel like our shows are always ones that are fun to follow up on the strategy show where we go game by game. Here, we're going to talk more about the overall lineup construction. I know Terry's going to give you guys the best feedback possible for both FanDuel as well as just general lineup approaches. And of course, today, premium tool of the day going to be our free player projection. So if you want to build lineups today, you can go do that in the simplest way possible. Just using the player projections, try to stack them up. So we talk a lot on these shows. 5-3 stacks on DraftKings is going to be the move that you're going to want to make more often than not. 5-2s if you want to get a little fancy with it. On FanDuel, you're going to the 4-man stacks, but stack them up. It is a slate today with 13 games on there. So take advantage of those free player projections is what I was going to say. Free player projections is the right one there. So boy, it's the middle of the day here and you would think that I know how to talk by now, but free player projections today. Make some lineups and do them. And don't use the flea player projections because those are not ideal. You'll get fleas from those. Also make sure to go check out JockMKT. They are the sponsor of the show. I'm sure they're excited to follow me for getting how to talk. JockMKT, of course, has turned fantasy sports to a stock exchange. Forget waiting until the end of the game to make money. JockMKT allows you to buy and sell shares of players in real time for real money with guaranteed payouts for all shares at the end of the night. They have daily markets for the NBA, MLB, NHL, and PGA. You can make real money every hour, every minute, every second of any match or game, every inning for baseball too. Use your analysis based on what you're seeing in the games and download the app to get started. And also use our exclusive Awesemo promo code of Awesemo for a $50 bonus on your first deposit. Is an exclusive offer only for the Awesemo community. So take advantage of it. We talk about these promo deals out there. They are the best thing you do for your bankroll. So go play over at JockMKT, JockMKT, and use Awesemo for that $50 bonus on the promo code. Terry, any overall thoughts on the slate now that I've figured out how to talk again? Very proud of myself, but any overall thoughts for FanDuel or DraftKings, anything you're just seeing based on the data so far?
Yeah, welcome back, buddy. It's good to have you back. Yeah, it's an interesting slate. It's short on pitching overall. Like there's no real. We've got two upside starters. They're starting against each other in Glasnow and Lynn, which kind of caps the win upside for one of them. We don't know which. I think there's still two of the prime targets on the board. And then we've got a lot of mediocre pitchers, a lot of pitchers who are below average, below par, a lot of guys that are struggling, although they're former quality guys. We've got Dinelson Lamet, who finally completed 5 innings in a start his last time out, but now he's in Colorado. It's a really weird pitching board. It's going to be a fun slate to put together. I think there are some great standout spots for bats, Coors Field among them. But yeah, for the pitching side of things, it's going to be interesting how these lineups come together. And it's going to be a lot of focus, I think, around Glasnow and Lynn justifiably. And then I think the idea is to just kind of spread out from there. And, we'll have some thoughts on that, I'm sure.
So let's start the debate there. It is a Glasnow and Lynn slate go where these guys are going to be in the same game. So that's something to keep in mind too, that that's going to decrease the chances here of getting win bonus for both guys. Obviously decreases to 0, some could say. But Tyler Glasnow going to look like the better projected play overall. Also the higher owned play has a 33% chance of being a top pitcher today, along with 41% ownership on DraftKings. Lynn right now a 21.7% chance to be a top pitcher according to our top pitcher tool, 31% ownership. And this morning, Terry, I think I was going a little more towards Lance Lynn. I think the overall feel for me is just try to be agnostic between the two guys, where there's going to be some lineups where saving that $800 on DraftKings is the move, but some lineups too where I think you can afford that and take the value stacks out there, hopefully ones that are going to be a little bit less owned than the obvious ones. But how are you approaching this one, especially on FanDuel, where you can only choose one pitcher? And I think on DraftKings, you can kind of cover your ass a little bit more, I think, with getting enough of both guys. But on FanDuel, you're probably going to have to make this choice more often than not. And I think it's going to be the most crucial one on the slate.
Yeah, it's more of a decision point on FanDuel, I think, for that reason. You can, like you said, you can still roster huge shares of both pitchers, given the 200% to work with for 2 starters. But yeah, on FanDuel, I think I'm probably leaning into Lance Lynn a little bit. You're paying $200 more for him than you are for Glasnow, and he's coming in at like more than half less than half the overall total ownership that Glasnow is. So getting him at that spot where he's not that much less likely in our top pitchers tool to be the top option. He's our strong number 2. I think he makes a lot of sense. I think he's got the better matchup of the two. The White Sox are very good at sequential hitting and stringing to runs, creating runs. They're 8% better than average creating runs, only have a 23% strikeout rate against righties. They just kind of have lacked power this year. 2.8% home run rate with 43 total against righties this season, 26 in the league, and they have a 143 team ISO, but they're good at creating runs. So I think Glasnow's, if we're picking at things, Glasnow's maybe in the worst spot, where Lynn's facing a team, they are sitting Tampa Bay, fourth worst in baseball, 26% strikeout rate against righties. They do have a 179 team ISO, so they're hitting well for power. They create runs 14% better than average. But I think that the strikeout upside makes a difference there for Lynn, given that ownership discrepancy, where I kind of want to lean into that side of it. That's really what I'm kind of focusing on here.
Yes, I'm on the same page with you overall. And I think you can be a little more nuanced with the ownership and all of that. And certainly we are familiar now with baseball. It's a world of infinite outcomes here. So you got to understand, if we are kind of nickel and diming Lance Lynn and Tyler Glasnow, they're still going to be pretty much core parts of what I think we'll both be doing today. But for Lance Lynn, I agree. Like the strikeout rate being there a little more heavy. I think I have more concern about the power going against Lance Lynn, where you look at the launch angle for him. I mentioned this morning on the strategy show, but it's the 20-degree launch angle basically is asking these guys to be hitting home runs. And granted, that hasn't happened a lot for Lance Lynn this year, but just a 2.3% run rate for him. But that is something that does give me a good bit of concern moving forward. It's not the day though, weather-wise, where I think that's going to necessarily catch up at a major way. Only 69 degrees, 64% humidity expected for that game at the White Sox. But Lance Lynn, I agree, just having a little more easy strikeout upside. Glasnow has the better stuff, so I think that's the case to be made there. But I just feel like Lance Lynn, and I don't know if you feel differently, Terry, but Lance Lynn, I think there is maybe a slightly lower ceiling than Tyler Glasnow, but I also think he's just, I just don't think he kills you. I think you could sort of, he's going to give up a home run or two. That to me seems like a decent possibility here. But I don't know. I just feel like Lance Lynn, I feel the most comfortable with the safety level, especially when you count for the price tag on DraftKings.
Yeah, I think that's apt, and he's also a workhorse of a guy. His completed 65 and 2/3 innings in 11 starts, and there's a few starts mixed in there where he was coming back from 2 weeks on the IL, so they gave him like 5 innings, and slowly ramped them back up. But he's pitching deeper into games. You could create a narrative around the idea that he's striking out a few additional hitters these last few starts as well. It could just be noise in the statistics, but it's right there. He's on form and he's pitching. He reliably has, over the last few seasons, pitched deep into games. That's what he's known for. So there's safety in that. You mentioned that there is the threat of Tampa Bay coming back the other way. They do have a good ISO, 14% better than average creating runs, and a 3.99 home run rate against right-handed pitchers is 8th best in baseball. So there is a bit of a threat coming back the other way, no question. But he's my top pitcher on the board, and when he's coming in at that much of a differentiated ownership to the guy on the other side of the game, who I think that, the White Sox are probably going to be more likely to win this game. I didn't actually have the odds in front of me when I'm saying that, so don't quote me on that. But let me pull it up. Am I right?
Yeah, it's Tampa Bay's good minus 110, at least as of this morning, I think is when I pulled that.
Yeah, I had Tampa Bay minus 108 in my last update. So I was slightly wrong. It's close to even money. So yeah. White Sox chances to win this one. So I'm going to go with Lance Lynn, given the length, given the idea that he's got a great shot at giving us a quality start and a potential for a win bonus, plus all the strikeouts.
Yep. So I think that's a reasonable way to look at it. And again, both guys are going to be the best pitchers on a slate where there really isn't a lot of great pitching. And I think we should talk about FanDuel now a little bit here, because you go to the top pitchers tool for FanDuel today, and it's not free on the site, but it is, of course, part of the package that you can get at awesemo.com/join. And make sure to use that promo code MLB Deeper Dive if you want to save 15% on your first week of Awesemo Plus. That promo code is active during the show, so make sure to go take advantage of it. You can also check out the Awesemo Plus MLB weekly package for only $15.95. So a couple different options for you guys at awesemo.com/join if you want to get tools like the top pitchers in your life. But FanDuel ownership, Terry, not the ownership, the potential to be a top pitcher is going to be very flat. The ownership is not flat. It is going towards Glasnow, and then it's also going a lot towards Adam Wainwright. And I'm curious your thoughts here, because Wainwright, to me, on the cusp of playable on DraftKings, so he's going to be owned quite a bit because it's an ugly pitching slate. But Wainwright on FanDuel, the price tag, I think, more appealing at $8K, and it seems to me like I can get the ownership here, but it does look like now he's going to be as high owned as anybody, higher owned than Lance Lynn as well, where Lynn is the highest price pitching option on the FanDuel slate. So just how are you approaching Wainwright? And I guess, are you buying in as much as the field with about 1/5 the ownership expected to go his way?
So Wainwright's a guy who reliably comes up for me in my model as a fairly well projected pitcher throughout the start of this season. He was doing so last year. He's somebody who I tend to get to more than the field does. But in spots like this, I tend to run screaming when he's owned triple what his probability of success of being the top starter is. So it's just going to become a spot where it's a spot I would like to be, but I would like to be on this when he's a 7% most likely to be the top pitcher and the field is there 5 to even 10% ownership. When he's coming in 7% probable and the field is there at 22% ownership, it's just too much weight for me. Even going up against the Miami team, I'll have some, but I'm going to undercut that number. And it's begrudging because I do like the spot. I do like the starter. That said, 21.8% strikeout rate is just 33rd percent in the league. He's pitched well in other StatCast areas, 66th percentile on hard hit rate allowed, 71st percentile average exit velo, 55th percentile barrel rate. He's pitched so far to a 3.95 xFIP. That would be his lowest mark since 2016. Still throwing a lot of strikes, 30.7% CSW, but he only induces 7.9% swings. 48% ground balls, which is a return to form, going back to what he used to be. Going up against the Miami team, 2.72% home run rate against righties is fourth worst in baseball. 25.7% strikeout rate is in the bottom third of the league. Only a 135 team ISO. There are plenty of reasons to want to roster Adam Wainwright here, and the price is right. It's just the ownership is really, really too heavy on that spot. So it just based on that alone, I think I have to look for other ways to roster pitching.
And I guess the question I would have for you is a follow-up. And to me, this is something with baseball. If you're playing MLB cash, all credit to you for being willing to do that on a day-to-day basis. But to me, Wainwright, I think out of the plays on DraftKings, like I feel like he's probably one of the more comfortable SP2s as a cash play at 8,800. I like the price tag. And I think that to me is how I'm viewing him, where for tournaments, I'm willing to get less in the field because I think that he's a perfectly fine play, but one that, the price tags, whatever. But will Wainwright be your cash game pitcher today? And I feel like we don't talk about this a lot. So if you don't have a strong feel for it, that's fine. But I just see the ownership and the price tag, and I feel like to me that's the spot that he's gonna be the most useful on today's slate.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think the cash lineup would probably just be Glasnow and him. It looks like, just going by, if we're going pure ownership and value, the way that would come together, I think that makes sense.
Yeah, so that's the way that I generally view Adam Wainwright, though he's pitching, 94.5 pitches per appearance so far this year, is mostly making quick work of the batters he's faced and not getting strikeouts with 3.7 pitches per batter faced. So these are marks to me that I think, Wainwright's going to be in there for a good amount. He's normally going about 6 innings per appearance. So Wainwright, one of those guys is not likely to kill you on the slate, but one of those ones too, where you can question the upside. And I think that's the main thing for tournaments, that you can, if you want to be with the field, be with there with about 25% of your lineups on DraftKings, and I guess a little bit less than that on FanDuel. Who else are you going to on FanDuel, Terry? Because it is such a flat slate. I'm willing to throw to you here to see who you're prioritizing, because on DraftKings, I think we could sort of point to it a little more, where it's not quite as flat on DraftKings, but for FanDuel, it seems like you could really just pick whoever you want and you're not going to be that far off.
So I wrote about the 3 guys that we've talked about already in my column, and then I wrote about a guy that I'm not sure I'm going to have any shares of, but I think he bears talking about at least, and that's Kenta Maeda. It's not necessarily even a FanDuel conversation. It's more of a DK conversation, where he's 7,400 and kind of fits into that SP2 conversation and was drawing some ownership there. This is his first start back from the injured list. He was out since, I think, May 22nd, so it's been a little while. He threw 52 pitches in a rehab start the other day. It was 4 innings. I think we could maybe expect 75 pitches in 5 innings. He could give us value for 7,400 on DK as an SP2 for that, but you're pushing it. And I think he was drawing, last I saw, it was like 17% ownership in that spot, which would be a little bit heavy. It looks like it's come down, I think. Yeah, so he's come down now. It's about that mark now. So that makes it a little bit maybe more appealing to roll some shares of it, but it's not a spot I trust. He's not been pitching well at all. So despite him being cheap, I'm getting an okay projection for him because I haven't cut the innings. And if he was getting a full start, I think he'd be interesting here. But he's just been really, really struggling. So just to warn anybody who's still kind of clinging to that one off, I think it probably makes sense to leave him on the shelf. Looking to answer that question better now that I see that ownership's come down. Guys who are projecting well for me that I haven't really made decisions on yet include Dylan Bundy, include Alex Wood, include Sean Manaea. Do you want to dig into any one of those guys specifically? I'm kind of just throwing darts on this slate, to be quite honest. I've got those guys all projected out pretty well. And then I've got guys like Brad Keller going up against the Tigers, who I'm kind of interested in for 7,500. But I take weird shots on guys like Brad Keller from time to time. He is a non-strikeout pitcher who has occasionally flash strikeout upside, including in like 3 of his last 4 starts. He's struck out more than 6. He's delivered quality. The Tigers are awful. They're a league worst in strikeout rate. So it's an interesting spot for a guy like Keller for a pay down option. Lets you get to 2 very, very high-end stacks. So I think guys like that are in play, given the fact that we've just got such a dead slate for pitching. It's just going to be a kind of a mix and match spot. But if we're talking about guys who are pitching like on form, pitching well, we're talking about more the Alex Woods, the Sean Manaeas. I just don't love the matchups for those guys. Similar with Dylan Bundy, who's on the opposite side of that Sean Manaea. I don't love throwing either one of those guys up against the A's or Angels, respectively.
Yeah, that's really where I would land with it too, where Manaea and Wood, like I think they are fine plays, but they're guys on DraftKings where Wood's going to be 17% owned. Manaea will be 10% owned, but he's also over $10,000 on DraftKings. And that to me is the big part for him where I'll pay that price tag if he's facing Detroit or Seattle. Maybe I think those are plays that you can get to, but going against the Angels, a team that doesn't strike out a lot, I don't see the reason to pay for that today. And I feel similarly about Alex Wood, where at 8,500, like I think that's a reasonable price tag, but this is a spot for him where I honestly just don't have the highest faith in him. And this is something that I guess might be how I'm viewing the slate a little bit differently, where Alex Wood, like I get it. He's going against, he's been good on the year or decent on the year, 23.5% K rate, but he's going against Arizona with a 21.6% K rate. I would rather take a shot, Terry, and I think you're going to vehemently disagree here, but I did talk about this on the strategy show this morning. So no surprise if you've been watching both shows. Austin Gomber to me is a dude that I can take a stab at today, I think, on DraftKings. 7K is the price tag. He's not going to be owned. He's actually under 1% projected ownership now. And I get it. He's been a player that we've all rostered at some point. If you're playing MLB DFS, like he's been chalk on some slates. But I think people are just kind of throwing him aside. I know San Diego's, a team you're terrified of, but it's Gomber's keeping the ball down in such a way. And he also has a 25% K rate. I think you can make the better case just to miss bats going to Dinelson Lamet on the other side. But I think for Gomber, I've seen enough from him where 84 pitches per appearance, a guy who gets a lot of ground balls, and a guy who's not getting tooled for home runs that badly, even though he's pitching half the time in Coors. It could completely go south today against San Diego. But for me, Terry, I just feel like I can get to a guy like Gomber at 10%. And I can also get to a lot of the cheap guys, I feel like, for fractions, like Braxton Garrett. I think I can get a little bit there. Mejia, maybe not so much, but a few of the cheaper guys I think you can make the case for. But I'll start with Gomber. I guess, what would you think about him? And would you be willing to take any shares at all? I feel like on FanDuel, maybe not as much of a play, but on DraftKings.
So I like Gomber. I think he's been pitching really well this season. Particularly for him, it's kind of been a standout season. 25.2% strikeout rate, 3.73 xFIP, 11.2% swinging strikes, 31.3% CSW. He's been excellent. And you mentioned his number one asset over time, provable over his professional career. He's been very good at keeping the ball in the yard. Most of his stints throughout the minors have had a below 1.0 home run per 9. He's at 1.19 so far this season. He's given up 9 home runs in 68 some odd innings. It's in front of me here somewhere, but it's 68 in the third innings. That would tie his same mark that he set in AAA in 2018 as a career worst. So even at that mark, that's not terrible for a guy who's, and his reputation is that he keeps the ball in the yard. So we can expect him to probably do a little bit better than he's done already to this point in the season. I think there's at least an argument to be made that he limits the power going the other way. And I wrote about this a little bit in my column today when I was writing about Coors Field. And I think that's on the table. What I'm more worried about is San Diego's ability with sequential hitting and the way that they manufacture runs, kind of old-fashioned way with the stolen bases. The average player in the projected starting lineup had 6 stolen bases, capped with Fernando Tatis. Tatis has 13. Tommy Pham has 11. And then there's a bunch of guys with 4, 5, 6. So this entire lineup runs, and they put together runs in interesting ways. They drive the ball well. So it's not necessarily about power. It's not necessarily about home run power. I'm a little bit concerned about the environment at Coors today. The temperature's up. It's Coors Field. It's not off the board by any means. You mentioned Lamet on the other side. I think I'd probably go to Gomber, even with the strikeout upside that Lamet brings, even with the Rockies being a worse lineup. I just don't trust that Lamet's going to give you any kind of depth. He might come out after 3 innings, and I don't know for sure that his stuff is going to work at Coors. It's mostly a horizontal movement on his pitches, but he's also more of a guy that just pounds the zone and has just this dynamic stuff that works. This is a chase rate when he just misses outside the zone, but it's not like a big horizontal movement on his pitch. So it's interesting. I'm curious to see how it goes. I don't know how much of it I would get to, but it's definitely in play on the Gomber side as far as at least a conversation for a value.
Yeah, and I guess I'm less opposed to just, 5% of these guys I think will get you above the field. If you really want to be here and get to 10%, I think there are some guys today getting more than 10% ownership that I just wouldn't mind having none of and just going to Gomber and Lamet. Gomber, I think the case we made for him is, as Terry just made, I think was basically what it would be, that ground ball guy whose home run rate has not taken a gigantic jump upwards. So granted, it's not been the hottest at Coors, but still we've had enough games there for Gomber where he's faced 282 batters this year and he's at a 3% home run rate. Like that's a noteworthy thing for me for a guy who's historically had a 2.5% home run rate since 2019. Lamet, though, I think the case for him is that I guess it could be, the movement could be an issue there at Coors, but still a 17% swinging strike rate on the year, 35% chase rate. These are numbers that should be for a guy who's a better strikeout pitcher than Lamet's been on the year for 27%. So to me, again, I'm willing to take stabs on these guys. I think it's a risky spot. And I know we often talk about, the reverse leverage here going against a high owned stack isn't necessarily something that is going to be a benefit, but I think you're going to have enough Padres in your lineups today that to me, if you get Gomber in and he somehow just cobbles together a mediocre day, like he doesn't give up a lot of stolen bases. He's minus 1.1 in weighted stolen bases against righties, and that's a lot of what he'll be facing today. The lefties are also terrible who he's facing. Hosmer and Cronenworth can't hit lefties at all. So that to me is the argument for Gomber, is that there's a pathway for him to have, 5 innings is what he's pitching every game. 5 innings of mediocre ball, it's a 7K salary, and you have some of the other dudes fail. Like, I think that to me is the logic for Gomber. If you are like me and willing to take on a little bit of risk, and certainly 6.1 implied total for San Diego, I would say probably more than a little bit of risk.
Yeah, and that's a very important distinction when we're talking about this is, because we're going to see like Kyle Freeland start one of these games later in this week, probably in this spot, and that is a major stay away. We're getting to these guys in this conversation at least, or at least hypothetically, because either one of them is capable in this spot of putting up at least a relevant game, if not an upside game. The upside game would probably be more on the Lamet side, where he comes out, completes 6 innings somehow for that price, and strikes out 9-10 of these guys, which is definitely on the board, even with some of these guys striking out at reduced rates. I think that is, he's definitely that guy in terms of where he's been for his career. And then this Rockies lineup is just weak in general, 34% worse than average creating runs against right-handed pitching this year, by far worst in the league. 137 team ISO, just a 2.56% home run rate against righties. They're bad. So it's not a spot where we're saying roster these guys to the point where just because people are on the bats on the other side, we're talking about the quality of the pitching. We can move on from Coors pitchers now. So
yeah, that's
sidetracked there a little.
And hey, sometimes people out there have an appetite for risk sometimes. And if this is one of those days, I never will begrudge it though. I think Lamet though, I think has a higher propensity. Like he's obviously facing a worse lineup, but I think he's got the higher propensity to give up a lot of home runs today. When you look at the barrel ball rate and the launch angle, 13% barrel ball rate, 18-degree launch angle. I think he's really, to me, more volatile than Gomber, where I think if Gomber, gets tooled, to me, the way the runs get given up today, by the way, is going to be the bullpen. I think Gomber is going to have the mediocre day, and then the Padres stack could still get there going against a Colorado bullpen that's just god awful. 1.5, we have 260 batting average allowed, high home run rate, high BABIP, high fly ball rate. But that's how I'm viewing it today. And I also think too, you look at the top pitchers tool, we do have some pitchers who are usable as value. It looks like I mentioned Braxton Garrett being a guy I wouldn't mind taking a flyer on. He has a 20% chance to be a top value pitcher on the day. That's noteworthy to me at 0.5% expected ownership. People in the chat were talking about John Lester. I'm not quite there, but I guess there is a little bit of logic based on the top pitchers tool. Matt Peacock was the other one that stood out to me as a value guy that you can pay for today and hope that he's just usable, because I just don't love the high price tags or the guys who aren't Lance Lynn, the guys who aren't Tyler Glass now. So that to me, I'm willing to take risks on the slate, and that includes the Coors game, that includes guys like Garrett and like Peacock. But Terry, I guess, what is the crappiest pitcher you would go to on the slate? And I would also point out too, Marco Gonzalez is going to be decently owned, and he is one guy that I do not have a lot of faith in that we could talk about in a second. But the dumpster dives, Terry, who are you willing to go to?
Boy, why were people arriving at John Lester? I'm curious about that one.
I don't know. It might be a BVP thing based on what I was seeing in some of the YouTube chats earlier, but I don't see it. But just gotta throw it in the mix.
Yeah, and it's important to note. You mentioned on the top starters tool. I'm sure you weren't looking at him there because he is at a positive leverage point in that his probability of being one of the top 2 starters is outstripping his minuscule ownership. But we're talking about a guy with a less than 3% chance of being one of the top 2 starters. So these are not the guys that we're looking for when we talk about the board in those terms. John Lester just not pitching on form. I know he's going up against a bad Pirates team, but they've got a few frisky bats, particularly against lefties in that lineup now. So I would not be looking to John Lester. As far as who I want to take shots on, I mean, like I said, they're all kind of shots type of pitchers today. So I think it makes sense to spread out to guys that are projecting well for Alex, guys that are coming in with reasonable probabilities of success, and then and positive leverage. The guy that I was talking about before, who I'm struggling to, there it is. Couldn't click on the right thing on my board here. Is the guy I was talking about before was Brad Keller, who's pitching to only a 19.1% strikeout rate, walking 10.1% of hitters, has a 1.75 whip this season. These are not good numbers at all across the board. 24.8% swing call plus swinging strike rate, but he is facing that weak Tigers team. The Tigers this year are worst in the league, 26.9% strikeout rate against right-handed pitching, creating runs 11% worse than average. They do have a league average 3.45% home run rate, 1.54 ISO, and have hit 51 home runs in the split. So there's a little bit of threat coming back against him the other way. But he's a guy who's also been good at keeping the ball in the yard over his career, somewhat capping the Tigers' power upside the other way. So I'm interested in shares of him. I would potentially roster some JT Brubaker. He's a guy who's pitched well in spots this year, going up against that Nationals lineup. Doesn't project great for me. I don't love it. But again, it's a slate kind of like that. So that's what we're dealing with today.
Yeah, and Brubaker is somebody that we talked about on the strategy show, and I should have mentioned because I generally like him too on these slates where there's a lot of ugly guys. Brubaker is generally going to give you 4 to 5 innings of work, and he'll find a few strikeouts there. He's not a monster by any stretch, and it's not a great strikeout matchup against Washington, but as long as he survives some of the top hitters there, like he can have a usable day here. He just has to really just get through Turner and Soto, and I guess to a lesser extent Josh Bell. But I think really Brubaker, I'm with you, I think has some potential in the spot. And the last guy I want to talk about is Marco Gonzalez, just because I do see the 10% ownership going his way on DraftKings, and we talked about him earlier this morning on the strategy show, so apologies for beating this drum again. But I look at the numbers for Marco, and I think the projection looks solid from Awesemo today, but I have a lot of concerns looking at the underlying numbers where the park is going to help him out a little bit today. It's not a very hot day in Seattle. The wind as well, not looking too crazy. Humidity also under 60%. But Marco, I see the 16% barrel ball rate he's given up on the year and a 19-degree launch angle, and that's something historically where he usually was a decent ground ball guy, and now I don't know what the case is for him now, but it's getting worse. It looks like every season over the last few years, up to a 42% fly ball rate. And he's going against Minnesota, and every one of these guys can drive that ball pretty well, whether it be with launch angle or just the high exit velocity. So in his spot to Marco, he's the one pitcher I feel like I would avoid because 10% in our ownership projection, based on how sometimes the field gets a little bit exuberant for a guy who just projects decently well and looks like value. It wouldn't shock me if Marco's higher than 10%, even closer to 15%. And if that's the case, like I wouldn't want a single share of him tonight.
Yeah, I think the field's going to get carried away on him, and I just tend to not throw lefties at this Twins lineup for just, power reasons coming the other way. They've got just some tremendous right-handed bats in that lineup that can just put a major dent in a guy if he throws one bad pitch. So it's just not a spot for me. Yeah, Marco's pitching all right, but only a 20.3% strikeout rate on the season in 36 1/3 innings, 4.76 xFIP. Like, what are we really chasing here? The 6,000 price is fine, but there's other guys on the board at similar prices that we like better, that potentially project better. So I think that's a stay away spot for me, or at least definitely a firm undercut with the field going out to that degree. And I agree that I think that'll get as we get toward lock, probably around 15.
Yep. So a shocking number there for Marco. Definitely one to watch the ownership on. And of course, make sure to go check out all the deals that we have going on at awesemo.com/shine, or all the packages that we have. And also use that promo code MLB Deeper Dive. That'll get you 15% off of your first week of any package there for a weekly package at awesemo.com/join. And that includes the MLB packages. So go take a look, find one that works for yourself on there, and use that promo code MLB Deeper Dive. But let's flip the hat. We'll do money time real fast. Give you guys a preview of the top 5 owned plays on DraftKings and FanDuel for the day. Ownership projections were just updated 40 minutes ago, so this is about as fresh off the presses as you're going to get. And actually, is the ownership projections free today? I thought it wasn't, but it looks like maybe they might be. So I think they were free yesterday. It might just be not updated on the site. Let me just make sure to see this. Actually, looks like they're free too. I know it's player projections are supposed to be free today, but maybe the ownership is. So, hey, if ownership's free, you don't even need me for money time. So go click that link I just dropped into the chat, and you can read along with me for the top 5 owned plays on DraftKings. Number 1, projected to be Tyler Glasnow at 41% expected ownership. Number 2, Fernando Tatis, 38% expected ownership. Lance Lynn, number 3 at 31% expected ownership. Number 4, Manny Machado, 28% expected ownership. And number 5, Adam Wainwright at 27% expected ownership. And Terry, we talked about this, but the Wainwright one is one that stands out to me. Like, we get people want to go to the Padres. I think you probably should come in a little under on some of these guys, but Wainwright is being owned like he's as good as Glass now and Lynn. And I think that's a mistake, even though the price tag, I think, is going to work pretty well.
Yeah, the price is really helping him out there as the, in that prime SP2 spot, where I think you're just able to get to enough of the Padres with him and maybe one of the other good starters that it makes sense that he's getting that much ownership. But for me, that's a spot where I'm looking to pivot to some of these. I don't think Wainwright stands that much clearly more above some of these other guys that we've talked about from that mid-range, that he deserves that kind of crazy over ownership in terms of his probability of success. Let's just put it that way.
All right, and let's talk about the FanDuel top 5 owned plays for everybody on there. Fernando Tatis, number 1 expected owned play, just shy of 40% projected ownership. Number 2, Tommy Pham, 33% expected ownership. Number 3 is Will Myers at 30% expected ownership. You're going to notice a theme here. Number 4, Manny Machado, 28% expected ownership. And number 5, Tyler Glass now at 27% expected ownership. And Terry, we're going to transition over to top stacks now, so I guess we could talk about it. But when you have a literal 4-man stack of San Diego as the highest owned option on the slate, how are you approaching that? Because these are clearly the guys that are going to stand out with a lot of the field being on them, and you can take some lesser owned guys on FanDuel, I guess, to get that ownership product down. But how are you handling Fernando Tatis, Tommy Pham, Will Myers, Manny Machado, all of them over 26% ownership?
Carefully. Yeah, that is a problem for sure on both sites. You get a little bit of offset with the 2 lefties who are bad against lefties if they're in the confirmed lineup with Eric Hosmer and Jake Cronenworth, if you want to take that shot, like you said. And then it spikes on DK at least right back up at the end with Jorge Mateo and Victor Caratini, both also over 20%. It is just difficult to roster this team on DraftKings. On FanDuel, the back end of the lineup is lighter. You can get to the bottom of the lineup if you want. Jorge Mateo would be interesting as a wraparound in that spot. He's a kid with blazing speed. The on base isn't there right now. 241 on base percentage is just pathetic, but he's stolen 3 bases in his 80 plate appearances with that 241 on base percentage. If he gets on base, he's flying, especially with the way that this team steals bases. So keep him in mind as potentially a way to offset some ownership for you on the FanDuel slate while not rostering one of those lefties in a bad spot. Otherwise, good luck putting this thing together in unique ways while also getting to a reasonably decent pitcher. It's going to be a matter of, do you want to take Padres with bad pitching shots or with some of these really popular value pitchers and then get to the same value stack as everybody else? Or do we maybe want to spread that around to one of the other 12 games on the slate, or even maybe grab the other side of this same game and go that route? I know the Rockies are going up against Dinelson Lamet, who are expecting to strike out the world, but he's only going to be in there, like we talked about, for 3 to 5 innings, most likely, and probably toward the shorter end of that. I don't know that they run him out there in Colorado for all that long, especially if something, doesn't look right with how he's getting hit or something like that. So there are arguments to be made, but like I said before, the Rockies are terrible, 60 some odd % worse than average creating runs. There's a good reason not to roster Rockies here as well. I can get away from both these teams. I will firmly be under the field on both these teams.
Yeah, I would think, to me, for San Diego, it's hard to say that I wouldn't want to get some exposure. I think it feels like a 15% cap to me for DraftKings, where I would want these guys, because I think you're getting enough of a taste of the lineups then. And then, you can also still get some different looks. And for me, get some Austin Gomber coming back in the hopes that they somehow underperform. And the thing for me is, you go through and, like, if people are going to play Eric Hosmer and Jake Cronenworth as contrarian plays, you're taking such a big leap of faith, really, to get to these guys, where Hosmer's 4,900 on DraftKings, Cronenworth's 5,300 on DraftKings. Cronenworth's like legitimately a good hitter against right-hand pitching, but against lefties, he is so bad. A .048 ISO, 73 WRC plus. Hosmer 77 WRC plus against lefties with a 126 ISO. So maybe you can get a little bit closer there. But and Mateo, I get the point with him too, but he's going to be 17% owned on DK. Caratini's going to be 20% owned. So the only way to get this ownership product down would be a 5-man stack with Hosmer and Cronenworth, and then you are paying an exorbitant amount at a position where first base for both guys on DraftKings. Cronenworth could be second base too, but you're paying a steep price tag at a position where somebody else could break the slate at that position. And I think that's not an appealing option. I think the move could be mini stacks and all that, but I don't know, Terry, if you have any sort of game theory approach to this, because I don't see an obvious one. And I think, to me, the move is just to decrease the ownership and really focus on 3-man stacks.
Yeah, and just to pile on, if you think it through with people who are building that stack and then saying, how am I going to make this different? Oh, I'll roster the lefty. Well, all the damn people who are building this stack are making that same decision, the ones who are trying at all to make it different. So all the good DFS players or, quote unquote DFS players who, potentially maybe know what they're doing a little bit are switching it up to those same guys or making those same pivots to avoid, leaving those same positions open and rostering the other spots. So this is just going to be a team that's put together in the same way for everyone tonight. So I think it's just best not avoided. Again, like you said, 15% cap makes a lot of sense to me. Get to half the field's ownership, take your Padres shots. You won't be left, completely in the cold if they go off totally, but you would have to have so much of this team that it would just be completely untenable for the entire rest of the slate for them to really pay off in any significant way if they do go off where you're not going to just be with the field. So I think it makes sense to spread out on this one. 12 other games.
Also, we did just get the Colorado lineup, and I think there are a few changes here that are noteworthy. Josh Fuentes is going to be in the mix, and Elias Diaz is going to be in a catcher, it looks like. So that's two that were not in the projected lineup I'm seeing. And I think the Colorado side, just to address them really quickly so we don't just spend all of the slate talk about Coors, but it's obviously an important spot, though. So we want to make sure we're covering as thoroughly as we can. Going against Lamet, again, I mentioned Lamet to me in play at pitcher, as is going to be Gomber, but I will take the bats from both sides. And Colorado, I think you could make an interesting case here for the 5-man stack. It's obviously going to be less owned. I think is the main case really you're making is going to be that it's going to be less owned by a wide margin to San Diego. But I think the one-off bats, the mini stacks would be the most appealing option. And you do have a few guys here. Fuentes, we don't have an ownership projection on yet, but I think his price tag will be pretty cheap. Elias Diaz, same thing. And then you also have Jonathan Daza, who's going to be 1% owned in the 2-hole. And he's certainly a guy who has done really nothing, I guess, in the majors overall. Not a lot in the way of home runs or anything, but still 1% ownership for a $3,300 guy in Coors against Lamet, who gives up, perfect home run launch angles and barreled ball rates. I'm willing to take stabs on Colorado a little bit more, Terry. I don't know if you have a feel for it, but I feel like getting less ownership, still being in Coors, I think is the one way maybe you can benefit here from a little bit less ownership.
Yeah, I mean, that would be the approach. If somebody said you had to roster this team 150 times and you can only choose one of them, and it's otherwise this is a normal tournament, which one would you enter? I would enter the Rockies just based on the ownership, just based on the fact that they're a team in Coors Field going up against this starter who's not going to be out there for the full game, despite his major strikeout upside. He gives up all that contact that you were talking about. So there are good arguments to be made. And with way less of the field on them and at lower cost, I'll add, particularly on FanDuel, they're definitely lower cost. Nobody over the 3,800 mark that Trevor Story's in, and significantly lower than that across the board. So I think they're at least the interesting team from a game theory perspective about just get away from the field if you have to roster one of these teams. But again, they're an awful team. They are just not good at creating runs. They just don't get it done. They don't hit a lot of home runs. So it's a bad lineup. Like you were saying, though, Lamet is sitting in the 8th percentile in barrel rate and the 14th percentile in hard hit rate allowed. So there are good arguments in the contact space about why you can get to the Rockies. And there are good stacks to be built with guys like, Charlie Blackmon, Ryan McMahon in there. Brendan Rodgers is a kid I wouldn't sleep on. Multi-position eligibility and cheap on both sites, not getting a ton of ownership. Very high-end prospect, that kid. CJ Cron, I don't have the active lineup loaded, but CJ Cron, ton of power in there. So
your Cron's still in, don't worry. So you're
okay.
good there.
Yeah, so he hasn't hit for much power, 153 ISO and only 5 home runs in his 184 plate appearances. But we know there is a ton of power in CJ Cron's bat. He's a launch angle guy. If he connects with the right pitch, it's going. So I wouldn't leave CJ Cron out of stacks. There are ways to put together the Rockies in low-owned, cheap configurations that make them more interesting than the Padres.
Yep. So we cast our hat into the ring here for the Rockies. And I think that's the main thing here is that there's opportunity here and less ownership. And that's what you're really looking for in tournaments. Let's keep talking through here. We got a super chat from our guy Sold Dope asking Glasnow in a Giant stack or Wainwright in a Cub stack for FanDuel. And I have to say, I don't love the Giant stack today because I know Matt Peacock not been great on the year. And I guess maybe you can make a little bit more of a case overall because of the bullpen being so bad behind Peacock as well. Peacock's not going to throw that long either, about 41 pitches per appearance on the year. The one thing he does, though, and the thing that jumps out to me is a negative 0.7 degree launch angle means he's basically getting guys to drive the ball down. And for a Giants team who does have hitters who are driving the ball for the most part in every situation, lots of high launch angle guys, including Lamonte Wade in the leadoff spot, Yastrzemski, Flores, Belt, all these guys do a good job of getting the ball up. But I think it could be a bit of a trap. So I guess I would go to Wainwright and the Cubs, Terry, but I don't know if you have a lean here, or maybe you feel the opposite of me with Glass now in the Giant stack versus Wainwright and a Cubs stack on FanDuel.
I wrote about the Cubby side today as my stack of the day, so I'll stick with that for sure. Going up against David Peterson, I think it's a good spot for them. He's been good, 25.5% strikeout rate, 3.61 xFIP over 11 starts, but he's only finished 47 innings before he hands over to the bullpen. He walks 10.1% of hitters. He's got a 1.51 WHIP, so just guys on base all the time. Good opportunity for some sequential hitting. Good opportunity for some power hitting. The Cubbies have strikeouts available for him. 25.7% strikeout rate is 8th worst in baseball against lefties, but they've got a 4.7% home run rate. That's second best in baseball. 192 team ISO is one of the leading marks in baseball. Create runs 14% better than average in the split. I like the spot for the Cubs. They were standing out as underowned and underpriced. I like that spot. That would be my choice. That said, if you can get to another spot, I haven't updated the ownership on Waino on FanDuel. So let me check where that's at, because that would be a key factor in that conversation. Yeah, I don't really have a strong recommendation, so I'm fine with it. I'm fine with going with Waino. If you can find a way to pay your way to Lance Lynn, I would maybe do that.
Let's talk about some of the other top stacks. According to the top stacks tool, which again is part of that Awesemo Plus membership. So if you're trying to figure out, if you're a person who's new to baseball and you just want to get the basic data you need to get going, using the top stacks tool, figuring out which stacks are going to be overowned, which ones are also overowned because of just one or two players driving up the ownership is a big part. So for slates like this one, where you see, we talk about a team like the Padres and everything tells you like, hey, the Padres are a great play. It's not that they're not a great play. They have the highest implied total, one of the highest marks you'll see. Some of the slates we've had this year with 6.1 implied runs, but it's about looking at the ownership and figuring out how to approach things. And for MLB Dfs in particular, like that is the most important part, is just figuring out the overall construction part. Let's talk about some of these FanDuel bats, Terry, where it looks like for FanDuel, we're going to have a lot of ownership going into the Padres, as we talked about, but a one team that's going to be significantly underowned, I guess, or relatively underowned compared to their chance of being a top stack, is going to be the Cincinnati Reds, who we discussed a little bit earlier, I believe, but just a team in a game really where both sides are going to project decently well. The Reds, not the highest implied total, but they're going against Guy and Eric Lauer, who has gotten, to me, unsustainable results on the year and seems due for some negative regression. He does have a 27% K rate on the year, 3.3 xFIP, but since 2019, a 4.7 xFIP, a 22% K rate. So some things here that should not hold. And even with the good results, Terry, still giving up a ton of home runs, a 6.6% home run rate for Lauer on the year, where I feel like Cincinnati, they aren't the highest potential to be a top stack, a little bit lower than I would think, with 3.8% on DraftKings and a similar number on FanDuel. But with nobody going there, just feel like that's one I would take a stab at right away.
Yeah, I like the Reds today. I was getting to them a decent amount in just early crunches, and as I was hand building, putting lineups together, they were number 2 overall in my power index, where I just take the average of the full lineup and the average of the top 6. Apologies to anybody that got swept up with me and the Indians yesterday. That one didn't go well, but the power index is usually a pretty good indicator of where we're going to see some home runs. So I really like the spot for some power from these Reds. You mentioned he's given up a decent amount of home runs and a bad home run rate so far this year. I'll go along with that. He's sitting in the 8th percentile in barrel rate, the 35th percentile in average exit velo, and the 13th percentile in expected slugging percentage. There is just a very good argument to be made for the Reds power bats. We kind of know who they are at this point, but Jesse Winker is having a phenomenal year. 344, 418, 638, 294 ISO, and 17 home runs. Kid's just crushing everything. Nick Castellanos, similar story, destroying everything he sees. Tyler Stevenson is kind of interesting in there, and that a lot of people don't go to him, but he gets on base, 18% better than average, creating runs, hitting cleanup in that lineup. He's an underowned option as a catcher and a first baseman on DK. Catcher who you don't have to roster a catcher on FanDuel, but he fits in. Anytime you can get to a cleanup hitter with no ownership in a lineup like this, it makes sense. Joey Votto is kind of rounding back into form. Eugenio Suarez is hitting 171 if you care about batting average, but has 14 home runs and a 214 ISO. So he's still got the power. So there's plenty of upside there. I don't love rounding it off with Aquino and Kyle Farmer, but they're both guys that you can mix and match here and there. And Aquino draws a decent power mark for me, so I don't hate that spot. He's crushed 2 home runs already in 14 plate appearances this season, so he's got power upside that we've seen in seasons past. So I think there's definitely opportunity. A lot of righty bats in there, and then Jesse Winker, who can definitely get to this lefty. So I like the red spot for sure here.
Yeah, I think I might be a little more into Aquino than you were. Like, I actually think, I wouldn't say he's a priority necessarily, but I think the stack looks good with him, Suarez, Castellanos, Stevenson. Like, these guys are all decent price tags, are all going to benefit from the lefty-righty matchup against Lauer. And it's not a bad bullpen behind Lauer. I think that's really one thing the Brewers have going for them all year is that they have some decent guys coming out who can match up on either side. But I think there's a good potential here that at least one or two bats can get to Lauer, given the fact he's given up home runs. And I think the strikeouts get worse for him. And I think the overall numbers get worse for him. So this could definitely be a situation where everything kind of comes together and knocks Lauer back to where he's been historically. Any interest for you in the Brewers side is something that Greg and I talked about this morning. And for me with Gutierrez, like, I think I'm somewhat encouraged by the signs so far. The fact he's not giving up a ton of hard contact, the barreled ball rate in particular, 2% barrel ball rate to me looks solid. And I think the Brewers just a team that overall I'm never dying to get to based on the fact that besides Yelich and Vogelbach, like, what are you really going to that you're excited to roster? But are you willing to get to the Brewers? It is a high implied total. And I feel like I have to ask because they are a team that has one of the better chances to be a top stack, even though it is mostly flat besides that Coors game, as we talked about.
They come up kind of middle for me in terms of both my home run mark and my projections for the key hitters, the top end hitters. And then the bottom of the lineup comes up somewhat flat. I don't love this lineup. Like you said, you're going to Dan Vogelbach for power, Christian Yelich in there. If you want to roster like Avi Garcia, I don't have this lineup if it's confirmed. I haven't grabbed the update yet, but it's just a limited lineup in terms of who we want to get to. And then if you think of it in terms, again, of DFS, like with the people who are grabbing the same guys, you're rostering the same hitters from this lineup. Nobody's really doing this in such a unique way where they're rostering like Omar Narvaez, Adames, Peterson, and Jackie Bradley, or wrapping that around to Luis Urias and leaving all the good hitters out. There's no point in doing that. So I just don't love getting to this lineup because there's not a lot of good ways to put it together. They don't thread together that well. Not great for sequential hitting. It's a power upside spot. When they flash for home run upside, I'll get to some bats begrudgingly from this team, but I'm not getting those indicators really here against Gutierrez. So I think it's not a spot where I'll roster the pitcher by any means, but probably not one I'll get too excited about the bats, particularly with that much ownership on them. On
Gregory Ray, or I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name, Gregory, but Spags, I'm thinking of stacking the Reds, but I'm concerned that one of their players might break their leg stealing second base. Thoughts? This is a callback to this morning's strategy show, which I always appreciate from guys like Gregory. But Terry, you missed this news, and I don't want to bring it to you again, but my MLB The Show player broke his shin and while stealing, not stealing, on a double, sliding into second base. 60-day IL, ended up missing the World Series, and the Reds did in fact go on to win the World Series without me.
Oh, what a disaster. Have you found out if you're getting a ring yet?
I don't know. No, I honestly don't know. They did give me they extended my contract. I think I'm in arbitration next year, but I am up to $3 million a year. The MLB contract, boy, if you ever wanted to think about how much this sport screws their young players, play MLB The Show and see the contracts you're getting where guys like 22-year-old Barry Bonds, besides breaking his shin, and yeah, they just do not get paid in those first 5 years.
Stay healthy, kid. You can cash in 7 years.
Yeah, that's the hope. MLB.
It's a rough life making $260,000 minimum salary, but yeah,
look, it's still not bad. To be clear, like I'm not mad at it. I'm just saying for the Jared Kelnicks of the world, before we realize he may not be good at baseball, those are the guys that I feel the worst for. Terry, what's your priority stack? Is there one that jumps out to you as like, hey, on FanDuel, this is where I'm trying to go today? Because I feel like we've made cases for a few of the big ones, but is there one that really speaks to your soul? And I'll throw in the Minnesota I talked about earlier. That's the one that I'm really intrigued by. That's not going to be that owned on DraftKings, but is there one for you like that where you see something that it seems like the field isn't seeing?
So like I said, I wrote about the Cubbies. I thought that was a good spot, and I talked about it a little bit. You can read hitter by hitter over there in my article on the site today. Another team that's kind of popping for me in my home run model, and a team that I like to go to when they are doing that, is a team that's going up against a pitcher that you said you might be a little bit interested in. That's Braxton Garrett, and that's the St. Louis Cardinals. Really like the power marks that I'm seeing on these guys. They are underpriced across the board. They're low owned on the FanDuel slate, drawing a little bit more popularity on DraftKings, but certainly nothing where you have to sweat the ownership. And several of the key hitters, including Nolan Arenado, are not drawing very much ownership at all. So you can definitely stack these guys. Again, it's just from 1 through, let's call it 1 through 7, because Paul DeJong is in the projected lineup hitting 7th, getting stellar home run marks, including Adi Molina at the catcher spot. So you can roster this team from 1 through 7 at least. If you want to include Edmundo Sosa in there, more of a slap hitting kind of a guy, but sure, you can do that. I really like this Cards roster, and that's getting to guys, let's see, the core lineup, the core 2 through 6 has a average creating runs 23% better than average so far this season. So that's Dylan Carlson, Paul Goldschmidt, Nolan Arenado, Tyler O'Neill, and Yadi Molina. Getting to a core of those 5 guys, and then swapping in some Paul DeJong, who has excellent power marks across several seasons. He's at 172, 270, 373 so far this year, 152 plate appearances, and missed some time, just got back in the lineup. But he's hit 8 home runs. He's got a 201 ISO. There's definitely still power in that bat, and nobody's going to him. So I like putting the cards together in interesting ways, and when nobody else is doing it.
Yeah, I could see going there. Look, I think Garrett to me is a function of the slate, really, where getting that price tag allows you to get Glass now or Lance Lynn a little more easily, and then all the stacks you could basically want, whether it be paying up for the Padres or going a different direction. So that to me is the reason like a guy like Garrett's viable, but it's not because I think he's a good pitcher by any stretch. So I'm with you that there's a pathway for the Cardinals. Worth pointing out too, weather in St. Louis starting to get a little more hitter friendly, 80-degree weather, 50% humidity. There's going to be more humid days that'll make for better hitting to go around. But some potential here against Garrett, who has given up a 308 batting average on the year and not giving up a lot in the way of barreled ball rate and the launch angle, but still a guy that did definitely put up a lot of hits going against him. And maybe that does benefit going to some of the slap hitters in the lineup like Sosa. Other stacks for you, Terry? I feel like let's just go through some of the top stacks on the slate and I just give thoughts because there's so many to hit on. I feel like we're going to end up doing a disservice by obviously can't cover everything here, but Detroit is one I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on because to me, they're the one that's going to come up for a lot of people when you're running an optimizer. And they're a team that I think does that a lot where I wouldn't say they're a trap play, but you mentioned your I guess not your love for Brad Keller, your lack of distaste for Brad Keller on the slate. But Detroit, like I think there's a potential here because of the pitcher Keller is where he's all ground balls for the most part, giving up a 305 batting average, but it's all, again, just not fly balls, not home runs, a 2.8% home run rate, a 2.1% home run rate for Brad Keller since 2019. I just don't think Detroit has the ability to get there. Like, I think there's a decent chance they actually end up striking out more against Keller. And for the stack, it's going to be 7% owned and wouldn't shock me to see that number go up. I just think Detroit is, I would say, a trappy team, but I get why people would land on them.
Yeah, Detroit's kind of always that trappy team, like you said, and it's very cost driven. These guys have extremely low prices across the board. 3 guys in the projected lineup on FanDuel at the dead minimum, several guys just above it. There are reasons that comes up in optimizers, but yeah, it's not a great play going up against Keller. You mentioned the ground ball propensity, the idea that he keeps the ball in the yard to extreme degrees and demonstrably so over the course of extended time that we can kind of rely on it despite anything that maybe has popped up against him this season. So yeah, I think there's just plenty of reason to get to him. And like you said, there could be bonus strikeouts for a kid who has hit a couple bonus strikeout points in recent starts. When he's on form, he is capable of striking guys out. It's not that he's incapable. It's just that it's not typically what he does. He just typically pitches to that contact. But the opposing Tigers, 26.3% current year strikeout rate as a unit in the projected lineup. So there are plenty of strikeouts for this pitcher here. So I like the spot for Keller. I would not be getting to that. And yeah, if you're thinking about it in terms of it coming up a lot in optimizers, then that's a spot for me that it makes it for an easy pivot because if a lot of people are going to be getting to it, that's one we can, I don't want to say cross off, but it's certainly one that we can have easily and just not get to at all and not really consider. And if they get there, they get there. And that's one of the ones that, all right, that burnt me tonight. I made a specific decision and that's why it got me. Congratulations to the people who rostered Tigers in a bad spot. Like I'm willing to lose in that kind of a framework.
Yeah, I get it. And I think that's definitely the optimizer play is something that Alex Awesemo talks about a lot in these shows. And when we run that crunch time segment, when we have time and it's on a huge slate like this one, it's something just to keep in mind that, doing that for yourself. If you have a Fantasy Cruncher membership, just pull it up and just lock in the pitchers and see where people are going. And if you lock in Glass now, as well as Lance Lynn, you are going to get Tigers and you are going to get a lot of Tigers. And that's something to keep in mind for the overall slate construction. One stack we haven't hit on, which does have, it looks like the highest potential besides the Coors game to be a top stack. And also going to be owned about the same amount, it looks like, on DraftKings. On FanDuel, they look a little bit over-owned, but not too much to be onerous. But the Dodgers, 5.4 implied runs, going against Spencer Howard, and then whatever comes out of the Philadelphia bullpen. Howard throwing about 47 pitches per appearance, which is good for almost 2.5 innings, and maybe that number starts to come up. But he has been a decent strikeout guy so far this year, a 30% K rate, though does have just a 24% K rate since last year, so probably closer to a league average guy than he's shown so far. But the Dodgers, Terry, it's a decent weather day day here, not very humid, which usually isn't in LA, despite a recent run where we have it a little more humidity. But are you feeling the Dodgers? Because I feel like the price tags are kind of tough to get to, and they maybe are more of a pay up to be contrarian spot where I think they're a team that's going to come up a little bit more when I'm lumping in one of the cheap SB2 dart throw type guys. But are you getting to the Dodgers enough? And I guess, do you want to get there if you're not?
So it looks like they're pulling a little bit more ownership on some of the key hitters on FanDuel in terms of the guys like in the middle. Cody Bellinger's getting about the same ownership on both sites. He's the guy I want to get to the most in this lineup. But then some of the other guys are pulling a little bit more, which makes it just a little bit less appealing. Like Mookie's about double on FanDuel than he is on DK. So I like a little bit more on DK where those guys are going a little bit under-owned. And you can put this stack together maybe in some creative ways, maybe in some uniquely owned ways. But you're paying a hefty price to do it. $5,800 for Mookie, $54 for Justin Turner, $49 for Cody Bellinger. Still a discount, though. That's a spot, even with 16% ownership, I would potentially be grabbing some shares of that, even on a big slate. That's just an underprice. Spencer Howard, high-end prospect for the Phillies. You mentioned the strikeouts are there, but the reason he's been coming out of games is because his velocity diminishes a lot by the time he hits like the third, fourth inning. So that's been a problem for him. It's something they're really concerned about in Philadelphia, talking about already, is this kid potentially his future's in the bullpen? We don't really know. I think he stretches back out and is fine in overtime, but it's a concern in this spot against this team. So you're going to see Philly's bullpen. You're going to see it pretty quickly in this one. So yeah, I think it makes sense to get to the Dodgers. Would not have Spencer Howard despite any strikeouts.
Any other teams that you want to talk about here? Because one that I think is worth hitting on briefly is going to be Kansas City. I think them going against Boyd. Boyd has been a pitcher that's tough to get a read on, where there are some spots that I've liked him, or at least liked him relative to his ownership. Just a chance that he could go back to the pitcher that he's been historically. But today he's going to Kansas City, a 90-degree weather day for them. Not the most humid, so that's something to keep in mind. So that the bonus really is here when it's hot out and also very humid. The ball's going to fly a little bit more. But Boyd's still going up a 19-degree launch angle on the year, and he's going to face guys who can really smash him. I think in this spot with Santana, Sal Perez is really the one that jumps out with his lefty split numbers, 356 ISO for him against left-hand pitching, and also a very high home run rate. You also have guys like Soler, Dozier. I think the ownership is kind of scary, Terry, but maybe you can get the ownership product down by just going to Merrifield, going to Hunter Dozier or Kelvin Gutierrez, I guess Hanser Alberto. There's a lot of ways to stack them up, I think, that look appealing to me. So how are you feeling about the Royals?
Yeah, Boyd is all over the place. We almost made it through one show without talking about Matt Boyd. Yeah, it's a pitcher that I am always happier to throw bats at than roster. So when we're talking about him in that kind of a context, I'm on board. The Royals are a team that I like to stack anyway. I think it's a dynamic lineup in terms of threading together guys who have good hit tools and speed with guys who hit for power, guys who hit from both sides of the plate in terms of having a good lefty-righty mix, as well as switch hitters through at least the top end of the lineup. It gets a little right-handed toward the back end, but we've got tremendous power in a guy like Jorge Soler, kind of a sleeping tiger, only 6 home runs so far, a 178, 273, 30 this year. This is a guy who hit like 49 home runs 2 years ago. He is just immense power when he connects. So I like getting the Soler still, particularly when he's under-owned. Dozier, you mentioned, looks like he's pulling a little bit of ownership. And then they've got sneaky guys, again, for some hit tool and some speed quality, maybe a little flashy power like Michael A. Taylor, who we've all seen break the random slate here and there from late in lineups. So I wouldn't sleep on him for the dead minimum from late in the lineup on FanDuel. So I just like putting this Royals team together. I haven't seen the team ownership, so if they're going a little bit under or around value, I would definitely be there.
Yeah, so that to me is just one team that jumped out, not under-owned by any stretch, and actually do look a little bit owned over to the top, according to the top stacks tool, but still a team that, you can get that ownership product down enough where it wouldn't be an inhibitor to me that Perez and Soler will be really decently owned, or really maybe a little bit over-owned based on how you're viewing these guys. Any final team you want to plant a flag on, Terry, just to say like, hey, I brought them up on the show just in case people see you at the top of some FanDuel lineups today. Just anybody else you want to mention before we do a home run pick?
Looks like the Red Sox are flashing some power in my home run model, but the Red Sox are always flashing some power in my home run model. So I'll throw them out there going up against Alek Manoah. A kid has a lot of talent, but a very young kid, pitching to a 4.54 xFIP so far, 12.3% swinging strike rate, 26.2% strikes, but he's thrown 14 and a third professional major league innings so far, and he's running into a buzzsaw of a Red Sox lineup. So I'll throw them out there as the team that I'll probably end up on begrudgingly. They're not that highly owned. They've got a ton of power. You know who the guys are that you need to roster.
Yeah, and Manuel, somebody asked about him for season long. I actually would like him more for season long than for DFS today. The price tag to me not down quite enough, and the strikeout rate I think is going to be something that he's going to have to feel it out for, because as Terry mentioned, he's given up a good amount of power, 11% barrel ball rate, 11-degree launch angle. He's basically asking guys to hit it hard, and I think going into Boston with an 85% humidity as well in Boston could not be a tougher spot for a guy who's still figuring out his stuff in Manoah. Home run pick, Terry. Who's it going to be?
Oh shoot, who did I give in the article? Let me pull it up. It was Nolan Arenado from the St. Louis Cardinals, who I talked about having all that power. He was my number 2 guy behind Tyler O'Neill in the model, but I went with Nolan Arenado just for safety.
Oh, also, our boy News God on Negro Loco asking, does Dean Kramer starting for the Orioles change anything for us? I didn't pull him into my pitcher pool. Let me just see real fast. But I would think that makes Cleveland hitters a little more appealing based on what I remember offhand of Kramer, a guy who has generally given up pretty good home run marks.
I had Kramer since this morning, so everything in my power index and everything about the Indians was, and everything I said was based on that. They burnt me yesterday. I'm getting okay power marks on them, okay projections. They look nothing like they did yesterday, which probably means they'll go off against Kramer here. 21.3% strikeout rate for the kid, 5.13 xFIP, 1.66 whip, certainly a targetable pitcher. That said, the lineup has been a little bit clunky.
Yeah, and I think Cleveland here, I would agree. I think their chance of being a 3% top stack today, or 3% chance rather, being a top stack today, I'd watch that one come up here. And I think watch for the ownership too, because I think the price tags are reasonable enough here that Cleveland will gain in popularity, I think, because Kramer was not on some of the sites I was looking at earlier today. And I think that's something that was going to make them look a little more appealing. Watch for the run total too. And that one, and then my home run pick, Sal Perez is going to be the one. He just grades out too well. He's chalky. He's going to be very expensive to play a catcher, but I just find it hard to believe he doesn't hit one home run today off of old gas can Matthew Boyd, who cannot figure it out. Make sure to follow at DigitalB21 on Twitter. Follow at Kris Spags as well. Show us some love on there, because we are here for you guys basically every day doing this for you on the Deeper Dive or on the Strategy Show. And we appreciate all you guys for being here. So make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel before you go. And also go check out JockMKT and use that promo code Awesemo for a $50 deposit match for yourself. Get that free money and play on JockMKT, a very fun site to play on, especially if you are a person who is watching the games and likes to use your feedback for that stuff. Go check them out. We appreciate you guys being here. Have a great day and good luck.